Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to CAM Filmmakers Summit, Work From Home Edition. I'm Sapna Sakya. I'm the Talent Development and Special Projects Manager with CAM. First of all, I'd like to thank our funder, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Thank you for their support, specifically for the Filmmakers Summit. I'd also like to thank our co-presenters for this panel. Thank you for getting the word out. OCA, the Asian Pacific American Advocates, San Francisco chapter, Frameline, as well as Bay Area Video Coalition, BAVAC. We hope the Filmmaker Summit can be a space where our community, the makers, our fellowship cohort, our partners, can connect with each other and ask the hard questions that affect our work, the work of making films, of collaboration, and of sustaining our livelihoods. This is the second session in our summit. This one is entitled Personal Narratives in Documentary, focusing on the nuances of personal voice, narration, and questions of privacy, when perhaps the protagonist may be your own family. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Vicky Du. Vicky is a 2019 CAM Fellow, an ADOC Core member, and Director of Light of the Setting Sun. Vicky, I'm handing it off to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sapna. So I'm really excited to be facilitating this conversation today with all of these incredible filmmakers. First, just to talk a little bit about myself and why I'm moderating this before we jump into introducing the panelists. So like Sapna mentioned, I was a CAM Fellow last year, and I'm currently working on my own personal feature documentary called Light of the Setting Sun. I'm looking at how trauma has spread all throughout my family since the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1949 to the present, from the East to the West.
爸，你知道我是谁吗？你知不知道我是谁？
那个时候共产党来了，他就把我祖父当天就游街打死掉了。那我祖母一看就往后院跑嘛，他就跳那个池塘就淹死掉了，就这样整个家就毁掉了嘛。
你可不可以想你最兴奋的时候跟你的爸妈？
兴奋，好像没有。我们家的人就是比较冷静啊。
可是不是指你爸妈，也是奶奶、姑姑、舅舅。
我们总之一句话，我们同那个老一辈的人合不来。
Just bear with us. We're going to play a few clips, and I know it's a little bit hard to hear and see, but hopefully you'll be able to get a sense of everyone's projects because they're all really special and have unique forms and everything. So now I just want to introduce the panelists. So everyone here today is part of the CAM Fellowship, so they're either a mentor or mentee. And so I just love to so can you please tell us your role, the project you're working on, and your relationship to personal filmmaking? Can we start with Jude?
Okay, hi. My name is Jude Chehab. I am one of the mentees in the CAM Fellowship. The project I'm working on is called Q, and my relationship to personal narratives is that this is my first documentary feature, and it's a personal story. And I find it interesting. It feels as though I'm kind of giving I'm telling the audience, or this is how I'm introducing myself, right? And like being really vulnerable and like giving the first film be something that, is literally my introduction, is me being vulnerable and telling my family story. Yes, it's my first feature.
Awesome. And you're working with Senain. Senain, can you please tell us about you and your work and your relationship to personal filmmaking?
Hi, everybody. Yes, I have been working with Jude, and we've been digging into a little bit of her story and her family's story. I have been making films for a long time. I started out as a journalist, first with ABC News and with CNN, and very quickly realized that I wanted to tell longer form stories, and started working with Davis Guggenheim on a film series that we did following teachers through their first year of teaching. And very quickly after, I wanted to sort of jump into directing, and I worked with Geeta Patel. Geeta and I both made a film called Project Kashmir, which was part of CAM's support. We were able to put that together, and it ended up premiering on ITVS's Independent Lens. And that film follows both of us as we go to Kashmir to find out what the conflict there is about through the eyes of ordinary people. And what we found out was that we both sort of became part of that story. So that was a really difficult process because we didn't expect it to start out that way. So I love personal storytelling, but I also realize how difficult it is.
Thank you. And let's jump to Anula.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anula Shetty, and my relationship to personal storytelling and documentary is I'm part of a video collective called Termite TV, and in some of my earlier experimental works, that's when I used voiceover, and personal storytelling. But since then, it's been a while that I used personal voiceover for documentaries. And the project I'm working on for the fellowship, for the CAM fellowship, is called Cosmic Egg, and it's my first feature-length documentary. And so we're at this process now where I'm trying to figure out how to blend in personal storytelling in a feature-length documentary.
And Anula's mentor is Grace Lee. Grace, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I am a longtime filmmaker. I'm excited to do this because I think a lot of emerging filmmakers, a lot of people who make their first films tend to dig into who they are and kind of stories that are personal to them. And I did the same thing. I made a film many years ago called The Grace Lee Project, which explores all these women named Grace Lee, incredibly common Asian American woman's name. It's kind of a personal, humorous investigation into model minority stereotypes, where I knew that my narration would be an essential part of the storytelling, even though it wasn't just about me, right? And then, what I hope to also talk about here is, like 10 years later, I made another film about Grace Lee Boggs, the activist, called American Revolutionary. And, I pretty much didn't think I would use my personal narration in that film, but I ended up doing it because many times you do things for the good of the film or what's best for the storytelling. So I am excited to work with Anula on her project and also to engage in this conversation with everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. So I wanted to first see if we can talk about Anula's project, Cosmic Egg. So I know, Anula, right now you're working with Grace and figuring out how to write VO and narration. You have a lot of unique and disparate elements in your film. So first, can you tell us about your film? And can you give us some context for the clip we're going to play?
Right. So the film is called Cosmic Egg, and it's a story about the quest for a genetically related child, the desire for procreation, and it's set against the reproductive technology industry. So the film is set in Mumbai, and the story is told through different characters who are involved in something to do with reproductive technology. So there's an egg donor, there's a surrogate mother, there's health workers and doctors. So the film follows all these characters. And the clip that you're about to see is one of the characters, Anisha, and she's a surrogate mother. She was a surrogate mother, and now she's an agent who recruits other women to become surrogates.
हाँ तो बोलने देना, वो अपने हिसाब से पढ़ाएगी।
नहीं जाऊंगा मैं।
क्यों नहीं जाएगा? क्यों नहीं जाएगा?
मेरा टिफिन का।
दीदी तेरा टिफिन दिया?
मैं नहीं जाऊंगा, मैं नहीं जाऊंगा, मैं नहीं जाऊंगा।
सरोगेट के पहले हमने बहुत काम किया है, हर काम किया है, कांदा बटाटा बेचा है, कपड़े बेचे हैं, और जब बिल्डिंग में जो कचरा उतारते हैं ट्रेन में, मौसमी संतरे वो बेचा है, जो मच्छी का धंधा होता है वो किया। मतलब कोई काम में मैंने ऐसा नहीं सोचा कि ये गंदा काम है ये।
नहीं, मेरा पहला रिएक्शन ऐसा था कि मतलब ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है, दवाई से बेबी तैयार होना, बोला मैं इम्पॉसिबल है, बोला ऐसा हो ही नहीं, बोला तुम मुझसे छुपा रहे हो, तो बोले नहीं मैं सच सच बोल रही हूँ ऐसा है। तो मेरा तो बोली देखो अभी आपको भी काम नहीं है, मुझे भी काम नहीं है, ये कर लन दो। मैं बोला नहीं नहीं, तो इन्होंने डोनर के लिए
पहले मैंने पहले डोनर के लिए किया था, डोनर नहीं हुआ मेरा।
So I'm so curious, after watching that clip, like I know this is something you and Grace are working on, so feel free, either of you guys can talk about this. But Anula, I don't see you in it. It's not necessarily I mean, we don't know if it's your personal experience based on this clip. So I guess I'm curious, why are you thinking your voice is needed in this film, or should be a part of the story you're telling?
Yeah, so this is something, so Grace and I have talked a lot about this. I've really struggled with this, how much, so one of the things, just to, give you a little bit of context of why, how my story fits into this film is that the thing in documentary, it's not just about, the issue or the subject that the character is going to talk about. It's also the questions you ask, and it's about who they're talking to. So one of the things as part of my process is that I always, tell my story to the characters before asking them to tell me their story. And the reason I was really interested in this topic and this film is because I myself went through infertility, and I struggled with, went through the whole gamut of reproductive technologies. And so in the beginning of every scene and every interview when we were filming, I would tell this is my story, and I would tell that to the characters, and that's, that gave us that connection, and allowed them to share their stories with me. So what I have I followed a lot of different characters, and now at this point, at this stage of editing, I have all these different scenes, and I'm trying to find a way to connect the dots, and I've been resisting putting my own story in it for a long time. I was trying to see if the cut would work on its own, but what I'm really excited about in this opportunity of the CAMP Fellowship is to work with Grace to figure out how I could use my story to connect the dots, to connect the different characters, and to give a little bit more of a context for each of them, which is not present in the edit right now.
And I'm curious, and maybe Grace, you can talk about this a little bit, like why I wouldn't think necessarily of personal VO to become like a unifying element, to sort of, to be a guide through a story, but I know that that's something you've done before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of people shy away from personal narration or voiceover because they think it's, it's sort of interfering with the process. A lot of people just like things unfolding, and I get that. But in a project like Anula's, where there's so many different elements, you know, there's characters we're following from India, you know, there's a personal, you know, there's like kind of the science behind it a little bit. There's kind of these dreamlike sequences, you know, looking back into like mythology. It's like, it's a lot of different elements that need to be kind of, you almost need a guide or something to help you move through it. And because Anula had this personal connection to this story, like what drove her, why are we watching this film? You know, like that's what I always ask myself, like, why are we here? Why should we care about this story? And just like how she would talk to the people who she was documenting, you know, I think they understand why, and we have that immediate connection to, you know, the urgency of this story. So, you know, in my own process, when I made the Grace Lee project, I kind of knew from the beginning that I did the same thing. I put out this call to all these random Grace Lees and, you know, explained to them like what my kind of thesis or question was. And I think that also just sort of helped the process of people, you know, sort of participating. It's less a story about, my films is more about a community and less about my own personal story, even though that's definitely part of it. But I feel that, you know, there's always some kind of personal element to any documentary. And I thought, let's just bring that out with voiceover. It's almost the easiest thing you can do. It's difficult, but you have access to it and you can constantly shift it and rewrite it and shape it and make it better.
And I like that that's something both you and Anula said. It's like a really, I guess it's interesting to approach someone who you want to be in your documentary and to say, I'm like you. And I really, you know, and it's more of a collaboration, or you have personal questions and you're hoping this other person can help you tease those out. But it's like very much a shared experience, which I think is powerful for both the filmmaker and the participant. I'm curious, so where does one begin to start writing VO? So working on my own film, I have journals that I can only describe as like, I would never want to read them again, at least not for like the next 5 years. It's just, you know, it feels, you know, like that scene from A Beautiful Mind, that Russell Crowe movie, where he puts like the newspapers all over the walls and he tries to find patterns. Like it feels like an impossibility to go through all of your thoughts and all of your impulses. I've also been told suggested things like recording my therapy sessions to even give me a sense, like an objective sense of my inner conflict. So yeah, I'm just curious how you all begin to even write VO and parse out, yeah, that storytelling element from your own voice.
Yeah. I mean, I have a practical tip when I was working on, you know, because it's so easy to sound very stilted when you're writing voiceover. It sounds very written, you know. And one thing that I've done in the past, and I think maybe Senain, you've probably done it too, is I had my editor, you know, who's also a really close collaborator, interview me, you know, so that it comes out, you know, maybe record the casual interview with somebody you trust, like your editor who's, you know, working on this thing with you. And just make yourself like answer the questions, you know, and it comes out much more naturally, and you can record these sessions, you can sort of make a transcript from it, and then sort of use that as a kind of guide to, you know, hopefully the things are coming out more naturally and spontaneously, and it sounds more conversational rather than written. I mean, that's just one practical suggestion that I've done in the past that has been super useful.
And just to follow up on that, I totally agree with you, Grace. It's like that is a process that I've used as well with an editor, or what I've even done is set up a camera and had a friend interview me, someone who I trust. And that way you feel like you're telling a story to somebody you know, and you're also not being clunky in your storytelling because it's a friend. And that's really helped. But, you know, I've also found myself sitting in a dark room with a little Zoom recorder and a mic and just sort of extemporaneously talking, or with a small camera. And that way you can use that material later or choose not to. In the same way, Vicky, you use your written diaries. It's almost like doing that you can then go back to and find snippets of, to maybe either use in the film, So then, you record them, as pristinely as possible, but you can also just use them as jumping off points for you then to go into the edit and say, this was an idea I'm exploring, and let your editor listen to it. And then they can then help push you in certain directions that you may not want to go into personally, because it's hard.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, the challenge of how do you capture that rhythm of speech? As soon as you sit down to write something, it becomes something completely different. How do you capture that spontaneity? So some of the things that I've been doing is going back to my, journals, so that, that to capture that, when I was going through all my fertility treatments, what were the thoughts that I had, so to capture some of that spontaneity, and the challenge is how do you maintain that in the voiceover, and then the other challenge also is about tone. Does the tone of my voice match the what the character stories and what they're talking about? So those are some of the things we've been discussing. If there's a certain levity, in my story, does that balance with what's going on with the other characters? Because there were so many amazing things that happened, in the process of making the film, the journey of finding the characters, of and literally finding them, like going through all these streets and trying to find out where they lived. And so all those stories, like how do you balance all that into the voiceover? So yeah.
Thank you all for sharing that. Jude, I wanted to talk to you and talk about your project. Can you tell us a little bit about your film, and then also give us some context for the clip we're going to play?
Yes. Also bear with me. I'm in Lebanon. The time difference is insane, so I'll try to be as alert as can be. Yeah, the project is called Q, and it's a personal investigation into me, my mother, and my grandmother's relationship to a Muslim women's cult. My grandmother was one of the first members of the group when they came to Lebanon. My mother was with them for over 40 years, and I was raised in the group when we moved from the US to Lebanon. And so it's an investigation into this world of women that were instrumental in my upbringing and my relationship to my faith, to Islam. And I wanted to make this film because I wanted to show the complexities of Muslims. Within our Muslim community, we paint each other with one brushstroke, and I think also people looking in do the same. And so the film felt like a responsibility towards my faith and towards myself, and to explore my mother's understanding of religion and, kind of where that takes me in the end, trying to find my peace with the faith. And also just kind of understanding, the impact that the cult has had on me. And so I go on this internal journey where, we kind of understand why religion is personal, and figuring out my womanhood and what it means to be a woman in the faith. And it's also a complicated love story. The root of every relationship in the film is based in love, and the results of that love, that extreme love that kind of, it goes into resentment and jealousy to an extent. I was jealous of the time that my mom gave to the group that I didn't get growing up. And so, yeah, the group is definitely prioritized over the family. And I still think that I'm fighting for her love in a way. The clip that we're going to see, I wanted to show something a little more detailed and specific, but just because of the subject matter, I kind of kept it a little broad. It's my mother and my grandmother's first time. I think it was the first scene I actually filmed with them together. And they just had breakfast, and so they start talking about the group, and it's interesting. My grandmother's an interesting character because each time I film with her, 1 minute she loves the group, and 1 minute she says that they've destroyed they destroy people. And so you see it in this clip. I think kind of you see one side of her, but in the film she really does shift between both opinions.
عيون العاشقين يرى ما لا يراه
أنا بس حدا
الناظرون.
يطلع في هيدي جارة، هي حرام مش كره يعني
بس بخاف من عينها عم بحكي معها وهيك ما يعني بتحسي انه هي مع الجماعه يعني مش منا معهم.
ايه
عرفتي كيف؟ يعني ما بقى في حدا تجبري يعني مثل نحن لما ربينا مثلا بالجماعه انه
كنا غير شكل.
ايه
كنا نحن عشقنا الجماعه، عشقنا الانسات، عشقنا الحياه اللي هن عاشوها ونحن طبقناها. يعني نحن يعني انا بتذكر انا اول حياتي معهم انا ما كنت حب كثير تكون معهم، يعني انا هيدي كانت سعادتي.
هي كانت حياتي.
يعني انا كمان لما مثلا نروح كان بحرب نروح عنا تحت القصف يرفعوا علينا المتروليزات بالطرقات لنرجع من الموالد او من يعني قضينا بس كنا
انت بدك تفوتيني معهم.
ايه
انت كان يعني
إيه
انه قاتله حالك بتحسي انه
ايه اكيد انا حبيت الجماعه وحبيت اولادي يكونوا من الجماعه وحبيت اولادي يحفظوا يتعلموا دينهم كثير. انا سعيده لما انا تكوني انت مع الجماعه، وانا لهلا سعيده مع الجماعه. انا حتى لهلا ما بدي اطلع من الجماعه صراحه، بقول لك اياها على ابو وضوح. انا بدي انا حبيت الجماعه وانا كثير بحبهم وانا بحبك تكوني معهم.
انت بتعتبري انه انا ظهرت من الجماعه؟
Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. And I'm curious because you were talking about the struggle of, I guess that your family has such strong feelings both for the religion, for each other. Like you're describing, it's real love, and that's both painful and all-consuming, but also really beautiful and like, you know, the purpose for a lot of people's lives. How do you decide, I guess, one, like how much of their emotions to reveal and how much of their personal story to tell in the film? And then kind of on the flip side, like how much of your own voice, your own story?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because in the beginning, in the development, it was definitely more about the cult. And for a very long time, I was so infatuated with the idea of the group and just this idea that, you know, people in my family are part of this group but know nothing about the group. And so I wanted my mother's input, but it felt very surface level. Like I was filming members of the group. But then I think once I started to hone in on the story that I was meant to tell, sounds so dramatic, but truly, once I got rid of the noise around just like this excitement about, you know, okay, it being a cult, my family's part of it, I think I finally had this sense of clarity and realized, no, this is a story. It's a personal story. It's a story about my family. And it's more about us than the group. And then, you know, the fourth character kind of becomes the religion. And so, yeah, definitely in the beginning, I wasn't necessarily about us as much as it was about the group. But then I think, yeah, it was interesting because also in the beginning, people were kind of telling me, Jude, you need to be part of the film. You need to come into the film. And I was so opposed to the idea because I felt like it was my mom's film and it was her story and I didn't want to take from that. Also, but then I came to realize that, you know, my camera is my character. And since I'm shooting it entirely and I feel like my gaze is so clear in it, and my camera is what's pushing her and it's criticizing her. So that's kind of, I feel like I went like a little abstract, but that's kind of, you know, the role that I'm playing in the film. I don't show that much on camera. You know, it's about me without me walking into scenes and inserting myself into situations. And I feel like it becomes more about me because of that, because I feel like my position as a storyteller becomes fixed because of that. I mean, I'm pushing her throughout, right? Like there probably isn't going to be a voiceover, but you hear me asking the questions, you hear me pushing her in that way. And as much as it's about her, it's definitely going to be about me because it's where her journey takes me in the end. Sorry, you asked two questions. The first question about the privacy also, it's interesting. So both my mom and my grandmother wear hijab, and I think that I lose a lot of moments. I don't know if it's a loss, but just kind of thinking about the privacy, but like I can't film one, you know, they have to know that I'm filming. So that's also been interesting. Like I can't get things right when they happen, you know, or I have to, if I know I want to film something, you know, put your hijab on. And so that does create this, just like another layer, right? And I think that also just talks about, you know, at the end of the day, you're coming into a Muslim family, and that's part of it. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that fully.
You did. That was great. And I really liked what you said about like you're controlling the camera, so obviously it's about you. Like the way we're even set on that, I don't know if it's lunch or dinner table. And you just
breakfast.
See hands. Like I feel like that's a position, breakfast, it looks delicious. I feel like that's a position you've probably often sat in where you're having breakfast with them and you're just looking at the table, but you hear everything and you see their hands and people need, you know, lemons or whatever.
And it's interesting, actually, sorry to cut you, but that scene, once I get in, so before the scene, we see the full, the wide of them all sitting having breakfast. And then at that point, my grandma was like, I want to take my hijab off. I'm sick of this. Like, why are you still filming? And so also the audio that she's saying in that moment, right before kind of the part that you guys saw, is me telling her, oh, your hair looks so beautiful the way you dyed it. And it's interesting because I didn't notice the first time I saw it, but later on I realized, you know, that's, yeah, it's because she took her hijab off, you know, and I wonder if people will pick up on that. Yeah, it like you said, it is kind of controlled in that sense.
So we're getting a lot of questions around how, so if you're making a personal film, yeah, I guess how do you deal with the ethics of how much do you reveal about your family members' stories that might portray them in an unflattering light or that they might not like. I think that's one thing. I think another potential complication, I know I face this one a lot, is different members of my family know different things about each other. And so, and this is like a highly negotiated, highly political decision of who knows what. And I know there's some pieces of information that really, like my cousin's suicide attempt, really profoundly affected me because my brother had also attempted suicide. But I know that that's something her children don't know. And so that's something I know I personally struggle with and still don't necessarily have an answer for. But I'm curious, yeah, how you all negotiate that. It doesn't have to be quite so heavy. Yeah. And this is, anyone can jump in and answer this one.
So, I think at least with Q, it's interesting. I mean, trying to think. My mother, I mean, it's a conversation, right? It took her a while to get to the point that she's at now. And I think that it took her a while because she had to, in the beginning, I mean, she didn't want to be part of the film at all. She was like, I'll give you the people that were part of the group. You can talk to them. It's not about me, but deep inside you, the film has to all be about you. But it's about you getting to that point. You know, my mom has been so in between about it all. And I think, I don't know if she realizes it, but that world is in the, she wants to share, she doesn't, where, you know, one minute she loves the group, she doesn't want to talk about them, she's loyal to them. And the next, you know, she's going through a lot of pain and she wants to vent to someone. And so I think a lot of it has just been conversation between the two of us. But also, yeah, there's some things that are coming up now, like her and my dad's relationship when she was part of the group that I didn't know about. That stuff that's coming out where, you know, she didn't need emotional fulfillment from my dad because the group was satisfying. She didn't care really if her family, like her emotional satisfaction was good. And so these are things that are coming out now that, yeah, I mean, I feel like it is, I mean, we've been able to talk through things, which is really good. Yeah, but I feel like it's probably definitely different with each film.
I have something to add. You know, just I feel like what is unflattering or not is really subjective. You know, like, and I think that as we know, these things are a process, especially if you're making a personal film. You're going, you know, you're tackling these subject matters because you have questions and you want to find some kind of answer or some kind of truth or some you're looking for something, right? And I feel like, yeah, I think it's really subjective, and I think it's also, how you treat the subject matter. I think there are ways that actually narration can help you negotiate some of these quote unquote unflattering issues. Like I remember in the Grace Lee project, one of the people I interviewed early on was this lesbian activist in Korea. And I was so excited to find a Grace Lee who was a out lesbian activist in Korea. And she was, all this amazing stuff, really great story that I'd never heard before, looking in the gay community in Korea, which was really underground at the time. And then when it came time for the film, when I was almost finishing the film and I was asking her for something else, she got scared. Like she said, I don't want, like I'm fine with it, but in case one of my parents' friends at their church sees it, I don't want them to, I don't want it to reflect badly on them. And ultimately I decided not, it was a real struggle. Like we had back and forth. Ultimately I decided not to include her image, but I talked about this process in the narration that I think captured the dilemma of, the film, and kind of in many ways it actually made it more poignant and better. But I think there are ways that sometimes narration can help you grapple with some of these things. Like one of the conversations we've had with Jude earlier, when she talked about when they take up the hijab, like I think maybe you feel like that's something that you're missing something because you're missing like more intimate moments, but perhaps that's something you could talk about in narration that sort of reveals something else about the relationship, right? So I think, you're observing always at many different moments of all of these things swirling around in our films, and narration can be the way into it sometimes.
I was just going to add to that too, Grace, is that even if you don't have narration, if you are journaling about it or thinking about it or clearly coming up with a process of how to explore this idea, you may come up with other ways, which is sort of like what you illustrated. And sometimes it can be better. You're challenging yourself as a filmmaker to tell a story in a way that, the first stage or the first obvious step would be to do narration. But how do you put your presence in a film that you don't want your narration to be in? And I really like the fact that you frame the film, Jude, in a way that it's a little bit off kilter, a little bit like you're sitting there, but yet you're leaning into a conversation. It's a private space. And it doesn't feel like that space is, it's off kilter, but yet it gives you that feeling of there's tension there. And so you're inserting yourself in those choices that you're making.
Yeah, the limitations often give you, force you to be more creative, I think. And yeah, I really, it's important to lean into these limitations sometimes because, a lot of times we don't have the archival footage, or we weren't there when something happened. This happens in documentary all the time. But people are creative, and, maybe there's animation, or maybe there's some other way to tell this story. So just use all the tools that you can.
And Anula, I'm curious if you've had any experiences negotiating that with, I know the participants in your film aren't necessarily your family, but just in terms of negotiating their privacy. I know you're in really intimate spaces in terms of their homes, but also hospitals before either egg extraction procedures are done, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about how you negotiate that?
Right. So, it's really interesting. When I first started filming, there was, the women didn't want their faces to be on screen. So, when I went on my first research filming trip, I had a lot of footage that I couldn't use any of the women's faces because it was something that was more, that they felt a little bit more of a stigma, or that, that they were doing these, that they were, being egg donors or surrogate mothers. But it's amazing. And then a year later, when I went back to film more footage, it was perfectly fine. They wanted to tell their stories, and they wanted to talk about their experiences. So so it didn't. I was very clear about what was going to happen with this, and this because I shared that the intention was to tell these stories about what these reproductive technologies do to our bodies, and what that all just to spread that awareness. So I think the women who were participating knew that, so I didn't feel that there was a attention about that. But I do want to mention because it is intimate subject matter, I wasn't allowed to film any births, like I didn't get permission from the hospitals to film. I was able to film a few things, but not. So one of the things that I was thinking about, I did want to have, because the whole film, The Cosmic Egg, is about this quest for this for a child. So I wanted to film some kind of a birth, and then I realized, I could use some of the footage of that was filmed when I gave birth to a child. I could use some of that, but then I felt like I own, the idea of who owns this story or who owns the footage. We need to think about that, because I started thinking about, well, maybe my kid who's like, really small now, like they may not like the fact that I use this image, where right now I think it's perfectly fine to do it, but the whole thing about privacy, how much to reveal, and it's complicated.
Yeah, I really liked Grace's suggestion that, maybe the solution is more telling the story of the struggle or the negotiation as a way to sort of tell that part of the story, to be really interesting.
Yeah, also, I just wanted to say one more thing. The other thing I also think about is, the idea of, is this doing any harm to someone, and that's where, in terms of negotiating, like what parts to reveal, and, what part of the story to tell. That's one of the things that I think about, like, is this going to cause any harm to people or people's lives?
Yeah,
I'd like to add onto that. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
Yeah, about the harm thing. When I started the film, the biggest question was, am I putting more bad images of Muslims out there? We don't need that right now. And so I think it is a big question, and also the harm that it would do to my mother. She can't engage with that community anymore. It would cut her off from them. But I think that it got to this point where you realize that, it isn't an easy thing to do, but when it becomes a responsibility, it's something that you have to do. And I think, getting her to that point where she realizes that there might be a certain level of harm, but there's going to be more benefit in it in the end.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like there's something about these stories that are inherently risk-taking. And yeah, harm is a possible outcome. But I think more often what I've experienced making the film is you're giving attention, which is a form of love. You're showing care. You're asking for help. Other people are feeling needed. Other people are giving you help. Like, I think those are other ways of also seeing what that interaction is. I think especially when it's around like the more sensitive parts of ourselves. Yeah, I think it's important to also change the context and remember what we're trying to do.
I think that's really important, is all the way across the board. We have to make sure that our subject matter, our collaborators in our films trust us and know that our intentions are there, because it's such a privilege to be able to make films, right? And to tell people's stories. And I know a lot of people are averse to showing their subjects the films during the process of making the film. But sometimes what I do is I show people clips so that they understand a little bit, because maybe they don't quite understand the whole story because they're just one part of it. But maybe you can see another person's story, and that person can make you feel a little bit more at ease. And I think also the longitudinal part of filmmaking also helps. Like, even if you are making a film with someone and you only have a few days to film with them, the fact that you come back and that you stay in touch and that you ask them about their lives deeper and build that relationship with them, so that transcends onto the screen when you're in that process of that intimate moment of filming with them.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I'm gonna jump into some of the Q&A box questions. So if anyone has questions, please, it's hard for me to follow the chat box, but if you could just type it and ask it in the Q&A box, that would help me out a lot. So first we have one question from Simon. And the question is around finding it difficult to film family members because the moment breaks often the second the camera's taken out or the camera's turned on. So do you have any advice for how to work around that?
I would say, for me personally, it's just been time. My dad is like super shy in front of the camera, but what I would start to do in the beginning was, if we were eating dinner or something, I would just film the table, and I noticed that his voice was calmer and he was acting like himself. As well as my mom, there was like little things that she would do. I would notice that she wasn't fully being herself. I don't think anyone else can notice, but with time I would notice those things go away. And so I think it's just like making the camera another family member at all times. I would have it out all the time. If they would say something, I would just pick it up. And so I think they just get used to it maybe with time.
I know when I was on camera in Project Kashmir, I hated it. I hate Zoom calls. I don't like to see myself on camera or hear my own voice. And what we did is we just told our cinematographer, who, was an amazing cinematographer, just to film us all the time. And, sometimes, like what you're saying, Jude, is like, I just started to forget that was happening. Even when we were driving around in cars, to be able to, we always had our mics on. We always put our lavs on, not even if we didn't think we were going to be filmed that day, because the way we filmed, we didn't expect ourselves to be part of Project Kashmir when we started it. So we decided to film it in two different ways. One, so that we could cut it either way. It could just be scenes with people interacting, and we would do an interview, but we would always film ourselves on the other side of that interview in case it became a conversation that we wanted to cut as we're sitting in a restaurant or something. So after a while of always wearing that microphone, it just became something that faded into the distance. And it also became something that, even if it didn't make it into the film, it helped inform something that then we could build into something bigger.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think if you're able, like, throwing a lav on yourself as the filmmaker allows you to pick up so much that maybe having the giant camera and pointing it right at someone might not. I think also having a separate cinematographer is sometimes helpful. I mean, if that's possible. Because, I don't know, at least in my family, having a separate person sort of just be able to roll through any of like the awkward pauses, the awkward moments, and just never put the camera down, just sets the tone that this person will be here and the camera will be up most of the time, which I find much easier than sort of me holding the camera and then saying, oh, like, just eat, just put it away, just eat, just put it away. And then I kind of feel like I have to because I'm their niece or whatever. One question I had, and maybe Grace or Anula, you guys can speak to this. is around how you deal with secondary trauma while you're making films. So like Anula, I know, for example, you're filming with families who have to either extract their eggs or have babies, basically, for families like American families, for European families, for money. And how do you cope with that day to day, especially since it is personal to you? Yeah, I'm curious how you cope or deal with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things as artists and filmmakers, we need to realize it's hard because you're in a situation where you need the tools of a social worker sometimes, and you don't have those tools. You're a storyteller, and sometimes the stories that you hear are things that they just won't leave you, and you keep thinking about it, and thinking about how you can like what resources you can point your characters towards. So it's, yeah, I guess what I've realized, doing this kind of work is, just to recognize your limitations. Like there are things that I can do as a filmmaker and things that I can't. And when there is a situation where, I feel that one of my subjects or characters needs more help, then I'll do what I can to find the resources for them. So through this, specifically with this project with Cosmic Egg, I was really fortunate because not only was I interviewing egg donors and people who were physically undergoing these reproductive treatments, but I was also in conversation with health workers and doctors, and so there were ways that we could connect, find connections within those different communities. As far as, are you talking about witnessing trauma, or as a filmmaker, or I don't, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think maybe there's no, like in my experience, while you're making the film, you're not aware, I guess, of how much, or at least I'm not aware of how much the film is affecting me emotionally until it gets to a certain point. And then suddenly, like, for example, I'm not sleeping, and then I'll sort of realize like it's taking an emotional toll. But it's almost like being on a roller coaster, but not being able to see the tracks. I don't know if anyone has shared that experience or has any.
I think every filmmaker goes through a roller coaster, like even if the subject is not outwardly traumatic. I think it's just like, will this ever get done? Can I complete my film? Is this good? Like, is this even worth, will anybody watch this? Does anybody care? Like all of that stuff is a constant. Yeah, I think there's like an internal narration going on with every filmmaker on every single film like that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult because I'm also a teaching artist, and sometimes, yeah, this story some of my students tell me, you can't, like, you get, well, you are traumatized by that, and sometimes it really stays with you, and then, yeah, it's like it's hard to figure out when you can let go, and then so once when I was telling the story of this particular student of mine to a friend, and the students stopped, once they shared their traumatic story, they stopped coming to the class. And I was like racked with guilt forever because I didn't know what happened, you know, like why they didn't come back and was it my fault? And then this person said, well, maybe that was what that telling of the story at that moment was what they needed to do. And, you know, they got what they needed. And so you don't have to blame yourself for everything, you know. So that really helped me, you know, just keep things in perspective.
How about Senain? Do you have anything to share about working on Project Kashmir?
Yeah, I mean, it was a film about trauma, because we're looking at a war zone. We're looking at different perspectives of a war zone where everyone has been a victim. And in the process, we're trying to, on camera, in front of an evolving story, deal with our own feelings about our friendship and about our relationship to the stories that are unfolding. So it was an incredibly difficult film to make. And you know, also, how do you tell a story when you are not, you know, your best? You say things and you do things that, you know, you regret later. And I think that process took a very long time. It took us a long time to film it, but also a long time to edit it. So you have to find collaborators that you trust. We had at one point 2, sometimes 3 editors working on the project, and each of them was assigned to work on different parts of the story and then bringing those together so that we felt safe as directors on the film. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is finding partners and finding people that you can be as open. And maybe one day you're just like, I can't process this right now. I need a little bit of space, and that's okay too. And it's okay to put the camera down and go away and think for a while and heal.
Yeah, I think like the normalizing of the, like, I'm not my best self, this is going to be very challenging, like letting your collaborators know all of that and letting the participants know that as well, I think is really helpful, because then at least you feel like you're not disappointing everyone or not, or yourself or the film. It's just a very challenging set of circumstances that you're in.
But it's also about intention. You're telling people that I'm processing, you know, and it's okay if you are too. So don't feel like I'm coming to ambush you when I ask you difficult questions or when you've said something that you regret. You can always come and say to me, please don't use that. And they should be able to trust you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, I'm now going to turn to the Q&A questions for real this time. Jude, this one's for you. Is it a cult in the Western sense of the term? So maybe what do you mean by cult?
Yeah, I know cult is a heavy word. By cult, I mean that there's spiritual abuse happening. Basically, there is a head woman in the group. She runs the group. Her name's the Anisa. That's the title that she's given. And so you get your entire religion from her. She controls your life, controls how you dress. They all dress the same. They all cut their nails the same. But then there's brainwashing that happens. I mean, you can't reach God without her. And if she's upset with you, that means God's upset with you. And if God's upset with you, that means she's upset with you. And so they really play on that, and they play on you being dependent on them and vulnerable, and they get you to, you know, tell them your secrets and your sins so that they have that against you. And yeah, so I think that's kind of what it is. Also having that head figure who is the Anisa, who becomes the mother. You don't do anything without asking her. You know, if you want to travel, any life decisions all go through her. Yeah, if that explains it.
Yes, it does. Thank you. We have one question regarding VOs. So regarding voiceovers, I feel like it can sometimes become too heavy. How do you reach a healthy balance, especially when VO is used because of lack of usable footage? It can become the easy way to get information across, but I worry if it's overuse. often documentaries will bore me with too much VO. So yeah, how have you all found the best way to strike that balance?
I mean, I think there's several best practices with voiceover. I mean, number one, you're constantly writing and rewriting it. You don't want to say something in a voiceover that's actually being seen on screen. Voiceover should just be kind of, you know, supplementing something that you can't see, right? Like, it may seem overused sometimes just because it's redundant. I think also it's a constant, you know, working with your editor. If you're the editor, constantly watching it with other people, you know, sort of gauging, like, have you heard from the person in a while? Like, did you forget that they were there? Maybe in your case, you think that there's way too much of it. So maybe pull back, right? Like, I personally think, you know, most films are too long and most films have too much talking in them anyway. So how can you get this information across in the most succinct way? And that really is a function of writing and rewriting and doing it again. And, you know, it's just rewriting, like editing is writing, editing is rewriting over and over again. Senain, do you have any?
I agreed. I mean, I recently saw a film that I thought the narration was just so spot on. It was a film that was nominated for an Oscar last year called Edge of Democracy. It's a story about a filmmaker who is making a film about her family and what she does, and also politics, and, you know, a great grand unfolding of the history of Brazil. So how do you tie all those things together in a way that feels like when you insert yourself, you're not creating this diversion to the bigger story, but every step of the way you're kind of adding a little bit of your thoughts, but at the same time, you're also letting those moments breathe. So I think it is the rewriting. It's about watching a lot of other films and see how they space and breath out that voiceover. I think it's also not being didactic. Don't tell me, like you're saying, show, you know, don't tell me, show me. But really also in the way that you tell me something, you don't need to say, I was wondering, or I wanted to find out. Like, just say it. Like, I'm there. Just talk to me like you would talk to your friend. Assume there's somebody with you. And then lastly, I think also it's about really reading a lot, like read novels. We tend to get stuck in our heads sometimes with nonfiction. And the more you see the way narration works in a beautiful novel, you can see how it brings the inner life aloud. That helps me a lot.
Yeah, that's great advice. Jude, this is another question for you. Can you talk about what your process was like generating the interview questions for your mother and grandmother? How did you know what to ask when?
Yeah, it's interesting how this project even started, because I guess I've had the idea for 2 years now. Well, that sounds like such a long time, but I was living in the US most of it. And so I would just come and go, and each interview is so different. And each time I would come, I would interview them, and it would be very much where I was in that moment. So the more that I would find out, like the stuff that I'd be finding out and that would be revealing themselves at that time, is what I was asking about. Most recently, I've been working on Mom's like main interview. And so with that, I mean, I know the stuff, we've kind of just been going through her life. And then as we go, things would come up. We would talk more about that certain thing. I mean, a lot of the interview questions are literally me sitting down and being like, what do you actually want to know, Jude? What do you not know about your mother that you want to know? What do you not know about your grandmother? And so it's trying to figure out, how did you reach this level of blind faith? How blind is the search for the unseen? Like, these are like some of the bigger questions that I have, that through moments where, she's telling me about when she joined the group and she was so in love with the Anissa at the age of in 6th grade or so, I don't understand how someone in the 6th grade could be so attached to this much older woman who's teaching her religion and teaching her stuff that she has to do and follow and these rules. And so it's just kind of like thinking about the bigger questions that I have, and then in that moment, pushing her. Yeah. I guess I just go with the flow. I don't know.
Do you use like your own, I know you're asking for your own curiosity, but I guess like you said, you're wondering how your mom was in love with Anissa at 12 years old. Like, then do you just think about, well, what have my personal experiences and thoughts been like? Like you can sort of, right, get a sense of what their experience was like based on.
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
Between the three of you, I imagine it's like there's a lot of similar.
Yeah, to an extent. There's also a lot of differences. Definitely. I think also in the attachment and where we're all at now. Like I said, like my grandmother is very wishy-washy about it all. And also just like intentions of joining the group and relationship to the Anissa, me kind of not knowing what was going on growing up, thinking that, oh, everyone has an Anissa that puts the hijab on them. Like this is what every Muslim has, and then realizing, oh wait, this isn't actually part of the religion. And so, yeah, I probably was the one to distance myself earliest on. Yeah, so it has been a very different story. Also understanding the attachment because, yeah, growing up and seeing the way my mom would react to this woman, I wanted the attention from this woman to make my mom proud, right? And so that also is reflected in my mom's relationship to her mother, and it makes me question the conversation that I want to have with my mother. Does she wish to have with hers? Maybe maybe an apology, and kind of figuring out, yeah, is there a parallel there between her and her mom's relationship?
Great. And then I have a couple questions here for what happens after the films are finished. Maybe this is more for Senain or Grace, but have your relationships with those others changed after the film was shown?
Go ahead, Grace.
You mean people in the film?
I assume so.
Yeah.
I think,
yeah. Okay. Not really, because I think it all sort of goes back to what kind of relationship, what kind of trust did you build with the people participating in your film in the first place? I mean, I did mention that example of in the Grace Lee project, but that was, yeah, I guess it changed because she didn't want to be in the film anymore. But for example, for someone like when I made the film about Grace Lee Boggs, I mean, this was a long, over 10 years I was filming with her. And, we had a great relationship, and just because she was also so supportive and curious about how I would interpret her life, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think it really boils down to like, if you committed to this story over a long period of time and were really devoted to it, I think, that sort of comes through in the final film.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that it is really about that relationship that you build. So I think for me, a tip is always to keep keep the communication open with your subjects from the beginning, so that they can call you anytime in the process of making the film. So they don't have to only speak to you when you need something. Sometimes if they need something, you should be there for them. And that it's just a matter, it's what I was saying, it's this privilege. We have this privilege of getting into these spaces and into these people's lives in ways that, family members don't get into. And so with that privilege comes that responsibility of being a real collaborator with them.
Totally. Yeah.
Can either of you speak a little bit to what that looks like? Like what instances have the participants in your films needed something, or have you been able to give to them?
I mean, a really easy example is you're filming with somebody and they're like, please don't film this, right? And even though you think it might be great for the film, like, I don't film it, like, why why should I? Like, they don't want it, right? Like they're giving up. You're in the power position with the camera, the ability to tell a story about them. If something, it makes them feel uncomfortable, and that you can demonstrate that, you know, you have their back in that moment, there's going to be another moment down the line where they are in an emotional situation or whatever, and they're going to trust you, you know? So I think it's really about the relationship in documentaries. When you're, you know, over long periods of time with small crews, you're building intimate connections with people. That's what's going to matter in the long run.
I mean, I've had subjects who've in the middle of filming decided they don't want to be in the film anymore. And that's because we're going into places that make them uncomfortable. And at that point, you can go away for a while. Remember, like, if you're in a film, making a film, it's not about just that moment. Sometimes it's about coming back without a camera, and just talking to them and, you know, about other things. It doesn't always have to be about, like, I need to capture that moment at that moment.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. So, you know, not with Cosmic Egg, but with a lot of my community projects, you know, there's that idea of building that relationship, you know, that is, it's really important. And, you know, some of my work has, you know, it's gone over 2-3 years of working with the same community. And I always think of it as you're building a family, you know, it's like this, so, you know, the question of has your relationship changed, you know, the period of filming is really intense. So there is a little bit of a difference after that. You know, you're not there all the time filming, but I think, really, you know, all those special moments that lead to building a relationship, like not just the filming, but sharing a meal together, or, you know, playing a game together, or those are the moments when, you know, conversations happen and relationships get built. And so, like, I try to make it a habit to, you know, to try to make it a point to keep in touch with the characters. But it's not possible to have that same intense level of relationship as, you know, while you were filming.
Yeah, I share a lot of what folks have said here. I think, like, the most something my producer said to me was, because I would often feel like, oh, I didn't ask that question, you know, we were all there, we're all filming, there's like a lot of stress, people are tired, a lot of camera fatigue. She was like, as long as you can go back, you know, that's the most important thing, which I think helped take off a lot of pressure. I want to ask, I think we have time for one more question. So this one is around using animation in personal documentaries. Can you share your thoughts on using animation to depict yourself in a personal doc? How do you balance making it fun but not trivializing? And what are the criteria you would use to decide whether to use animation or narration? Can you share examples? So when have you used it, and why? Why did you use it at those points?
I mean, I've used animation a few times, not necessarily to depict myself, but to maybe depict some ideas that aren't easily filmed, you know? Like in the Gracely project, I did this, you know, had this whole poll survey done, and I kind of did a really unscientific survey of, you know, what is the average Grace Lee? And so we used animation to, you know, whatever. She's, you know, based on my really unscientific information, you know, she's 25 years old. She's born and raised in California. You know, she took 2.5 years of piano lessons, you know, stuff like that. But mostly other times I've used animation is to, you know, bring to life a bunch of ideas that I have no idea how to deal with anyway. And in American Revolutionary, it's like, you know, Grace Lee Boggs is someone who talks about Hegel and Marx, and, you know, how do you explain all of that in a documentary about somebody's life that spans 70 years of social movement? So we did a fun, like, Marx in 30 seconds or Hegel in 30 seconds. And all you need to know is like the germ of the idea and that it was important to this person, and you can move on, right? it's just helping you kind of supplement the story without, and it can be fun. You know, I think most of the time using animation is kind of fun because it's can be snappy and short and graphic and stuff. But yeah, I haven't used it to depict myself. So.
And maybe just to close out, could everyone just share either a moment during filming or something someone said to you in an interview or something that happened that you just feel like was a very powerful lesson for you? Like what was something that someone said that really impacted you, one of the participants in your film?
I mean, something that I hear, you know, I just finished this Asian Americans series that's on PBS. And something that I heard a lot because we were interviewed a lot of, not necessarily, yeah, a lot of elders, right? And there are people who are just so grateful to be asked their story. And it's so simple, right? Like being able to share something that's personal to them. You know, I heard that a lot. It's just thank you for letting me tell my story. And it's just incredible because like, I'm thankful to that person for being able, you know, for sharing their story with us, you know, to be part of this larger series. So I think that happens quite a bit, like working in documentary and especially in, you know, in communities who don't necessarily get covered or asked questions or are asked or are seen as whatever heroes or something like that. But that always gets me. So
it's my mom, right? So it's such a trip because it's like, I mean, the constant good job, Jude, you know what I mean, you're on a roll. No, but I think one moment that was really special to me was after that scene, actually the one that you all saw. My mother on the car ride back, she was like, basically in their conversation, my grandmother had said, you know, you're copy paste, you're just like me. You know, you're such a force reckoned with, all these compliments to my mother. And I remember when we got in the car, she was basically like, Jude, if it wasn't for the camera and if it wasn't for you doing this, then I would have never heard that from her. And I would have never heard, you know, like my grandmother was very tough growing up and didn't say I love you a lot. She showed it in different ways, but just feeling like the power of the camera and the power of, you know, even pushing her to do this, if it wasn't for, you know, the camera, then her whole story would go down to the grave with her, you know what I mean? And so just feeling the importance of it and that she gets to have these moments with my grandmother now, you know, and it wouldn't happen if I wasn't making the film. So I feel like that's really special.
Anula?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I can't pinpoint, like there's just so many like strong, you know, things that so like my participants in the documentary have said. I can't pinpoint, you know, like there's the moment when in the clip, Anisha, when, you know, she talks about, you know, how when they took her child away, you know, that all she wanted was just you know, to see the baby. She didn't even get to see the baby. And, you know, so just some of those, you know, those images and words that just keep haunting you. So I can't, you know, I can't pick exactly, but I do want to say that, you know, one thing that in terms of like the voiceover and, you know, trying to figure out how do I put this narration and connect all these like really strong things that people have said. One thing that Grace in our conversation said was, think about why you love these characters and, you know, and think about how you want to make others love them. And, you know, so that was like, that's been a guide now for me in terms of writing my narration. Like, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to make people care about these characters as much as I care about them.
Senain?
I feel like I'm repeating what everyone else said because there is this feeling of intimacy, and I can't say that there was one thing. I mean, so many voices are in my head when I think about that. But I just really feel this great sense of community that, you know, we as filmmakers have. We understand each other, and I can talk to Jude in ways about her family and tell her things intimately as we work together as fellow and mentee and fellowship, I suppose. And that's the way it is when you're working with someone in an edit room or a DP, as well as your characters. That feeling of a greater purpose of why we tell these stories. And I always try to remember, you know, why are we telling the story of trauma? Not for the trauma itself, but for that sense of healing that we all have when we experience something together, when we watch it or when we make it. So, yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you all. That is all the time we have for this panel. Thank you so much to the panelists for doing this. And thank you everyone who's watching from all around the world. And I have one shout out, which is Grace's film is playing at 5 p.m. Pacific time as part of CamFest, and She Could Be Next is the title. So be sure to check that out in just like 3 hours. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. This was really lovely. I wish we could have done this in person, but this was still really great to be able to do it digitally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.